Last year, I was speaking at a conference hosted by Students Against Destructive Decisions, a national conference, 500 students from all over the country, high school students, and I asked them a few questions. First I said, how many of you feel compelled to use your phones for texting or for apps? Every hand went up. So I asked, how many of you feel stressed by your cell phones or your devices? Again, every hand went up. Finally, I asked, how many of you feel that you can put your phone aside? And there was no response. The room was dead silent. So technology, we can't live with it and we can't live without it. And since these devices have become so entwined with our day-to-day lives, it's really important that we talk about them. So Steve, let's talk about them.
Well, I think it's important to note that the conversation around technology is not one-sided. There are plenty of pros and cons to consider. So let's just start with the positives, okay? Whether we're talking about texting or Instagram or Snapchat or Tumblr, whatever our devices are, what they provide is access to constant communication, and that can be a good thing.
So it can be a good thing, especially in times of trouble. Technology has made it so much easier for us to reach out for help, whether we have an emergency on our hands or whether we need support in times of stress. So, communication. What else?
Well, let's just think about it. Our phones don't just give us access to each other. They provide us instant access to pretty much everything. All information is at our fingertips. It's never been this easy to be updated on the latest news story or to check the score of the game. In the past, information was harder to come by, but now anyone, anywhere, has the power to be informed, which I think we can agree is usually a good thing.
So communication is number one, access to information is number two, and how about this for a third? Documentation. With cameras on our cell phones, we're able to document lives in a way that was never possible before. And this can be as simple as taking a selfie with friends, filming a baby's first steps, but it can also be a powerful tool for law enforcement situations or where citizens hold others accountable for their actions.
And it goes beyond just documentation. Look, for young kids, these devices are a means of artistic creation. They're able to try their hand at recording their first songs in GarageBand or shooting and editing their own movies. These are really powerful tools for not just snapping photos, but for real artistic expression.
Which we at the Clay Center always are in support of. But those are just the positives. Now, what about some of the negatives?
Negatives? Well, look, the tough thing is the negatives go hand in hand with the positives. For example, we know communication is very important, but it's also important to know when enough is enough. We know, and we've known this for a long time, that our teens should have time to focus on schoolwork, in sports and arts, and their social lives. Too often, these devices can become real distractions from these activities.
So they're distracting, and I want to add another point. The more our teens turn to social media to get updates about what's going on in the world, the less they may turn to trusted news outlets for accurate information on current events. We may be taking in more information, but what about the quality of that information? It may not always be the best.
And I think you just pointed out what is probably the biggest problem with these devices, and that's the power they have to cause stress in our lives. The news that we can get on social media is often exaggerated or over-dramatized. There's constant pressure to be performing on social media. Our kids are pressured to compare themselves to their peers 24/7. Our brains never get a moment to rest, and that has consequences.
So what do we do?
Well, the first thing we need to do, we gotta have conversations. Parents should talk with their teens and young adults about the use and overuse of digital media, and then start to consider strategies for digital exposure. Way too often we use our phones and tablets mindlessly. Maybe it's time to think about when and how we want to use them. Consider putting them aside for periods of time, maybe when you're sharing meals or before going to bed.
I think another step is determining what's real news. It's important to discuss what constitutes reliable news sources. We need our youth to differentiate between bona fide journalism from comedy and personal posts on social media. I'm not sure many kids or adults can tell the difference.
Yeah, look, the best advice we can give, slow down. There are clearly times for urgent text, but if it's not an emergency, we need to know it's okay to slow down. It may feel like we do, but we don't have to respond to every text or post or Snapchat the moment it happens. The stress to respond doesn't always need to be there. And if we can just slow down, even just for a moment, it could go a long way in alleviating the stress we feel and the damages these devices can do.